Hello everyone on YouTube, this is me, the Student Witch. I just wanted to throw up a quick book review. I know the cover of this book is going to appear backwards, and I'm not appearing on camera because I'm still in my jammies, y'all. Anyway, I wanted to throw this book review up there, and I'm also going to be reading something that I wrote, an actual review of this book that I wrote for a class last semester. But I wanted to throw this up there because this book to me is a magical book, and I think a lot of witches and people who practice witchcraft could benefit and learn a lot from this book. But it's not going to be found in your typical witchy or metaphysical shop. And I don't know how many people outside of my academic field know about this book. It was originally published in 1987, and just as a warning for anyone who is interested in reading it, it is a very difficult book. Difficult in the sense that Gloria Anzaldúa, the author, she passed away in 2004 from complications with diabetes. So she poured her heart into this book. It is a mixture of genres. It includes poetry, personal anecdotes, history, essays, personal accounts. It's intense because a lot of the things that she talks about, a lot of the painful memories and painful history that she and her family and her community has gone through, it's all in this book. And it is a mixed language book. There are parts of it that are in Spanish that are not translated, but even if you do not know Spanish, I think you'll still get something out of this book. And the reason I say that it's magical is she's not only proposing a new way of thinking and knowing, which sparked the creation of border theory, which is really big in Latino studies, which is thinking and being and knowing and creating from that in-between space of the border. Right, where you don't really fit in anywhere. So that to me is magical because in this day and age, we still live in a predominantly Christian world, especially here in the United States. But border thinking and border knowing kind of shows how things like Christianity that claim to be pure actually were the result of mixing. Like human beings, we've been traveling and mixing and synthesizing different cultures and different influences since the very beginning. So nothing is pure, nothing is original. So it kind of disrupts that kind of logic or ill logic. But it's also magical because she does talk about different pantheons. I know in the witchy community, a lot of North American witches kind of turn back towards Europe, and if you're white, if you identify yourself as white, you know, our ancestors did come from Europe. So it is kind of a natural turn back towards European pantheons, like the Greek pantheon, or even the Egyptian pantheon, because European culture does have a long history of kind of borrowing from Egypt and, you know, legitimizing its own history by turning back towards Egypt. But there are other pantheons, and there are other gods and goddesses from the New World, from the cultures and civilizations that lived here in the New World for thousands of years before any Europeans landed here and decided to call it the New World. Because let's not forget, even calling the Americas, or even calling the Americas the New World is a Eurocentric perspective, so we can't forget about that. But yeah, she talks about Coatlicue, and I highly suggest doing some research into that goddess. It is an Aztec goddess. I highly suggest just doing research into the Aztec pantheon, the Mayan pantheon, the Incan pantheon, and when I say pantheon, I should probably say cosmology, because the way that they understand spirits and gods and goddesses, or they understood, is different. And so I think, as we turn towards Europe and our ancestors, if you are a white American like I am, let's not forget about the cultures that were already here, that had their own systems of being and knowing. And I think this book is magical because it reminds us of that, and to respect that and learn from that. And it's also magical because she talks about her own magical experiences, connections with animals. In this book, she does talk a lot about racism, the racism that she and her community, and sexism and homophobia, that she and her community have faced. But she also talks about animals and how animals and the connection to the land and things like that need to be re-understood in new ways. So I really highly suggest this book. Just know that when you decide to read it, it's going to be a journey. It's going to be a long, hard journey, unless you've already read it before. But so let me just jump into this book review that I wrote a few months ago about this book, and I hope that this book review will kind of spark some interest in it. So, in their 25th anniversary edition of Gloria Anzaldúa's Borderlands La Frontera, Norma Cantú and Aida Hurtado begin their introduction to the book with an anecdote from the Tucson Unified School System's 2012 decision to ban the book in an attempt to eradicate the Mexican American Studies program from both the school system and the state of Arizona. Cantú and Hurtado write, quote, "Borderlands is dangerous only because it has the power to change minds, to disturb complacencies," end quote. By placing Anzaldúa's text firmly within the politics of the present, Cantú and Hurtado not only prove the relevance and staying power of Borderlands, this edition's editors also capture the sense of urgency found throughout Anzaldúa's text, and it is this urgency that allows Borderlands to reach across the distances of geography and time in order to inspire political and cultural change. As a text that infamously or famously crosses the boundaries of discipline, language, style, Borderlands is an invaluable asset for both academic and non-academic audiences. Within academia, Borderlands has been widely read in ethnic studies, women's, gender, and sexuality studies, Latino, Chicano studies, queer studies, post-colonial studies, and performance studies departments, though it would undoubtedly prove to be an influential and provocative addition for other fields. However, Borderlands was not and is not destined to the confines of academia. It is a living text with political implications for grassroots activism and rebellion, geared towards the recognition and celebration of the new mestiza consciousness. Borderlands is divided into two main sections. The first, Atravesando Fronteras, or Crossing Borders, is comprised of 7 essays, and the second, Un agitado viento, Hecatl, the wind, is divided into 6 subsections. In keeping with the general theme of border crossing, Anzaldúa's division of the book into 2 main sections is fluid and does not adhere to any strict sense of separation or purity. For example, her first essay, The Homeland, Atzlan, begins with a mixture of song, a fragment of a song by Los Tigres del Norte, prose, and poetry. It is within this first essay that Anzaldúa sets the stage for the remainder of the book by placing herself and her writing within the literal and figurative space of La Frontera, or the borderland, between Mexico and the United States. The book's most well-known passage appears on the third page of this initiatory essay, allowing Anzaldúa to establish the U.S.-Mexican border as una herida abierta, or an opened wound, where the third world grates against the first and bleeds, and before a scab forms, it hemorrhages again, but the lifeblood of two worlds merging from a third country, a border culture." End quote. By combining family histories and social critique, creative and academic writing, various English and Spanish dialects, the human and non-human, and indigenous and Catholic cosmologies and iconographies, Anzaldúa presents Borderlands La Frontera as a tool for mental, colonial, sexual, and Chicano liberation, not by means of opposition to or rejection of the dichotomies of Occidentalism or Eurocentrism and the coloniality, but rather through a process of concientización or consciousness raising that transforms these dichotomies into dualities, two halves of a whole that together form something more than the mere sum of its parts. In Borderlands, Anzaldúa creates a new way of being and knowing that, as Walter D. Mignolo describes it in Local History's Global Designs from 2000, is an example of a new form of gnosis or knowing called border thinking, and Mignolo states, quote, "Border thinking is thinking from dichotomous concepts rather than ordering the world into dichotomies. It is, logically, a dichotomous locus of enunciation and, historically, is located at the borders of the modern colonial world system." Mignolo's theoretical framework, which relies heavily on Borderlands, uses the term gnosis to escape the epistemology-hermeneutics dichotomy within Western knowledge production. Anzaldúa, unlike Mignolo, does not analyze post-colonial and Western scholarship and philosophy through a Foucauldian-like genealogy. Rather, she returns to a powerful female indigenous deity in order to reveal her own form of border thinking, the new mestiza consciousness, as she calls it. She also calls this new form of border thinking and knowing the Coatlicue state, using the goddess as a symbol of, quote, duality in life, a synthesis of duality, and a third perspective, something more than the mere synthesis of duality, end quote. By relying on an Aztec goddess rather than post-colonial, postmodern, and post-structuralist theory, Anzaldúa not only makes Borderlands more accessible to non-academic readers, she also challenges the epistemology-hermeneutics dichotomy among many other dichotomies and transforms it into a third perspective, a duality that is understood to be constituted of two opposing forces that, when combined, form a more powerful and productive whole. As previously mentioned, the first essay in Atravesando Fronteras, or Crossing Borders, which is called The Homeland Aztlán, or El Otro México, The Other Mexico, begins with a mixture of song lyrics, prose, and poetry. The opening poem, beginning with the line, "Wind tugging at my sleeve," is structured with varying spaces between the words and indentations so as to create the simultaneous feeling of continuous flow and fragmented, jarred separation. For example, in lines 22 and 23 of the poem, reproduced here, they use extra spacing between the words walk and through, and an indentation in the following line, "I walk," several spaces, "through the hole in the fence," indentation, "to the other side." The spacing in line 22 emphasizes the separation that the fence demarcates between one side and the other, as well as the hole through which the speaker walks. The indentation in line 23 gives the sense of a continuation in the act of walking to the other side, thus allowing the speaker to enact fluidity between the two sides of the fence that undermines its role as a dividing line and marker of difference. Anzaldúa continues this theme of fluidity and difference by telling the stories of los atravesados, poor immigrant workers, the original indigenous inhabitants, colonization, and the Mexican-American War through the use of more poetry, historical analysis, and familial anecdotes. In the second essay, Movimientos de Rebeldía y las Culturas que Traicionan, or Movements of Rebellion and the Cultures that are Traitors, Anzaldúa introduces the themes of sexuality and machismo by revealing the dichotomies on which institutionalized and cultural homophobia and sexism depend. The dichotomies of man-woman, white-brown, virgin-whore, and straight-queer. She explains that as she made the decision to be queer, or to openly be a lesbian of color, she crossed the borders between these dichotomies and created, quote, a path of knowledge, one of knowing and of learning the history of oppression of our raza, end quote. Crossing the borders of sexuality and race, then, are ways of being and knowing for Anzaldúa. In the third essay, Entering into the Serpent, Anzaldúa explains how the ancient dualities of Aztec and Mexica spirituality became dichotomies, dependent on hierarchical structures, as cultural shifts, both within Aztec and European societies, favored male dominance and violence. The serpent here is a symbol of female sexuality, fertility, destruction, and regeneration that Anzaldúa uses to tie the pre-colonial and colonial past with the problems of the present. In a retelling of the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe, Anzaldúa shows her to be a relic of Aztec and Mexica mother goddesses, who were first made grotesque and violent by the misogynist indigenous culture, and later were desexed and conglomerated into a single figure by the Catholic colonial system of the Spanish Empire. Anzaldúa claims that Chicanos have three mothers, the virginal Guadalupe, the betraying La Chingada, and the weeping La Llorona, all of whom are different aspects of the same serpentine female sexuality that has been transformed and oppressed by cultural male dominance. The acceptance of and return to the serpent sexuality is the subject of the following essay, La Herencia de Coatlicue, or the Coatlicue state. The new mestiza, according to Anzaldúa, must take dominion over serpents, meaning she must take charge over her body, sexuality, soul, and mind, and make them her own. Toward the end of the essay, Anzaldúa states, quote, and someone in me takes matters into our own hands, over my own body, my sexual activity, my soul, my mind, not the heterosexual white man's or the colored man's or the state's or the culture's or the religion's or the parents', just ours, mine, end quote. The inheritance of Coatlicue is the new mestiza's identification with the dualities of Coatlicue and the rejection of hierarchical dichotomies of racism, heteronormativity, and neo-imperialism. The last three essays of the first section of the book focus on the transmission of knowledge through written and spoken language, culminating in the essay's emphasis on the new mestiza consciousness. In How to Tame a Wild Tongue, Anzaldúa focuses on the phenomenon of multilingualism and the role of language in the new mestiza's way of being and knowing. She emphasizes the intricacies of the Chicana identity, stating, quote, we are a synergy of two cultures with various degrees of Mexicanness or Anglo-ness, end quote. The multiplicity of spoken language and its inability to be pinned down or standardized in its spoken form are seen as tools and assets for the construction of the new mestiza consciousness. In Tlili Tlepali, or the Path of the Red and Black Ink, Anzaldúa uses the red and black ink of the Aztec codices as visual representation of her reconnection of the sacred and the profane through the act of writing. Writing then becomes a spiritual act, a cleansing act that liberates her from ethnocentrism, which is for her, quote, the tyranny of Western aesthetics, end quote. Words written on a page turn into the symbols and images that allow the new mestiza to reconnect with her subconscious and the dualistic force of Coatlicue. Finally, in La concientización de la mestiza toward a new mestiza consciousness, Anzaldúa closes this first section of the book with an affirmation of the new mestiza consciousness and its revolutionary potential. She states, quote, awareness of our situation must come before inner changes, which in turn come before the changes in society. Nothing happens in the real world unless it first happens in the images in our heads, end quote. As previously mentioned, the second section of the book is comprised of poetry, divided into 6 subsections. First, Más antes en los ranchos, or before in the ranches, La pérdida, or the loss, Crossers y otros atravesandos, crossers and other crossers, Cihuatlyoto, woman alone, Animas, and El retorno, or the return. The order of the subsections mimics the process of concientización for the poetic voice and her eventual coming into mestiza consciousness. The poetic voice in this section fluidly moves back and forth between childhood memories of harsh realities and difficult decisions, the historical trauma of the Mexican-American War, the abuses of Mexican migrant workers, and Anzaldúa's affirmation of the liberating power of writing and the new mestiza consciousness. One poem in particular, appearing in El Retorno, or the last section, captures the urgency of recognizing the borderlands as an inescapable aspect of Chicana identity. She says, to live in the borderlands means you. Being a subject in the borderlands means living in the space between the dichotomies of Western male-dominated knowledge and its hierarchies of being, but it also means living from a critical vantage point that allows the new mestiza to live sin fronteras, or without borders, to be a crossroads. The urgency of this poem is found within Anzaldúa's summary of what it means to live in the borderlands, because survival in the borderlands depends on accepting a life lived from within the crossroads and becoming whole despite the contradictions and complexities of the borderlands. Though some have critiqued Borderlands' style, or Anzaldúa's style in this book, or rather its lack of coherent, consistent style, it is Borderlands' at times disorienting style that gives it its strength as a text that challenges conventions and academic complacency toward a Western mode of producing knowledge. One option for measuring the importance and impact of Borderlands' La Frontera would be to list all of the scholars and critical works that were influenced by it, and in some cases could not have existed without it. Mignolo's Local Histories, Global Designs, José Esteban Muñoz's Disidentifications from 1999, Laura Gutierrez's Performing Mexicanidad from 2010, Ramón Rivera Cervera's Performing Queer Latinidad from 2012, and Ana Castillo's Massacre of the Dreamers, Essays on Chicanismo from 1995, among others, all include Anzaldúa in their bibliographies or pay homage to Borderlands in some way. But, like Castillo's hope for Chicanismo in Massacre of the Dreamers, there exists the hope that Borderlands and its new mestiza consciousness will not be limited to the, quote, suffocating atmosphere of conference rooms, the acrobatics of academic terms and concepts, end quote, so that their revolutionary potential may be carried out in our workplace, social gatherings, kitchens, bedrooms, and society in general, as Castillo says in Massacre of the Dreamers. 25 years after its original publication, Borderlands' revolutionary potential is evidenced by the Tucson Unified School System's decision to ban the book, and it is this potential that is the true testament to its merits as a resource for revolutionary scholarship and social change. Thank you, and I hope you guys check out this book. Blessed be.